So, again, for all of our internet friends, I'm Andy Turenne. I'm the licensed practitioner here at the Center for Spiritual Living, Greater Chico, and I welcome each one of you. It's always an honor and a privilege to be here and to be filling in for Reverend Michael. I'm so grateful for this, and this, my spiritual family. Thank you all for being here today. So the Dalai Lama walks into a pizza shop, and he hands a young man a $20 bill. And he says, "Can you make me one with everything?" Kid says, "Sure." He goes out and makes him a pizza and brings it out. His Holiness eats the pizza and enjoys it. And just as he finishes, he calls the young man over and he says, "Young man, where's my change?" And he looks at him and he said, "Your Holiness, change comes from within." Well, that's an oldie but a goodie. Yep. So the theme for this month is freedom, as we continue on talking about freedom. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, where am I going to start? And always a good start is to start with Ernest Holmes and see what does Ernest Holmes have to say about this. Well, apparently he had a lot to say about it. He thought it was pretty important because on the very first textual page of the Science of Mind textbook, he addresses it in 2 paragraphs, in the second and third paragraph, right off. And then he continues talking about freedom 37 more times in the Science of Mind book. So he equates God with freedom. So let me just start by reading a little bit of what he says on that very first page of text. He says, "To suppose that the creative intelligence of the universe would create man in bondage and leave him bound would be to dishonor the creative power which we call God. To suppose that God could make man as an individual without leaving him to discover himself would be to suppose an impossibility. The seed of freedom must be planted in the innermost being of man, but like the prodigal son, man must make a great discovery for himself." And then in the very next paragraph, very short, he says, "The divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom." Now, I think that's pretty clear, but I'm sure that if you had a discussion of this with other folks, some might tend to say, yeah, metaphysically and spiritually, that may be true, but in real life, this may be neither practical nor true. Have you ever thought about that? Like, there's a spiritual plane, and then there's this, in which everything is beautiful and peaceful, and then there's this earthly reality plane, which we live every day, that there's a spiritual path to nirvana, and then there's this road to confusion, and it seems pretty far from heaven. Well, from time to time, I've thought about that, but I got over it. I got a little better. Somewhere in my journey, I figured out that both paths are the same. Heaven and hell, spiritual and human, are 2 sides of the same coin. When I was young and dumb and whining and trying to blame people, places, and things for all the circumstances in my life, I would embrace this duality thinking. I did that for a long time. Occasionally, I still get sucked into what this country calls news, and start thinking about how awful the world is, how bad that person is, how terrible the politicians are, etc., etc. And fortunately, through this teaching and through everything that I've learned over the years, I'm able to catch myself and pull myself out of that more easily all the time. In fact, for the most part, I don't even turn it on. Somehow in my studies and practice, I learned that oneness is not just an academic or metaphysical term. Oneness is reality. There is one source, one energy, one power, one. Thich Nhat Hanh, who's one of my favorite spiritual teachers, says, people normally cut reality into compartments and so are unable to see the interdependence of all phenomena. To see one in all and all in one is to break through the great barrier which narrows one's perception of reality. Now, even Neil deGrasse Tyson, most of you have probably seen him on the Cosmos series now. You know, the noted physicist, he's an avowed atheist, and sometimes he's an agnostic, depending what day it is, I guess. Says, we all come from the one. We are all created in energy, and we have all been created in a Big Bang. We are made of star stuff. We are connected. We are one source energy and cannot be separate. And even cellular biologist Bruce Lipton, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with him, he says that all that is God. We are one living organism, and that we call God. We come into these physical bodies to sense, to taste, to feel. So that being the case, there can be no separation between the spiritual and human energy. There is only one energy, one power, one presence, and it is called life. Which reminds me, what do you call a schizophrenic Zen Buddhist? A man who was two with the universe. So, anyway, this thing called life is the thing in which we are all joined. It is the oneness that we are. It is the divine essence. It is God. It is freedom. So what does freedom mean? Personal or civil liberties, absence of slave status, the power of self-determination. Now there's a powerful truth, the power of self-determination, free will. As Ernest Holmes says, free will or freedom of will means the ability to say, to think as one wishes, to express life as one personally desires. He also says, and listen carefully, that we are individualized expressions of God and fully free to make choices on our own road to discovery. And I quote, and he says, and this explains why man suffers on his road to self-discovery. His suffering is not God-ordained because he, man, woman, creates his or her own experience. By individuality, it is meant self-choice, and Louis' favorite word, volition, conscious mind, personified spirit, complete freedom and power to back that freedom. End of quote. That is what individuality means. But it's more than just that. It's what the individuality means, and it is an individualized expression of that God presence that is within us. Even in the Course of Miracles in chapter 30, it speaks of free will. And in summary, it says, your will is God's will. God is always waiting for your direction and would never act alone. It goes on to say, how wonderful it is to do your will. For that is freedom. There is nothing else that ever should be called freedom by freedom's name. Unless you do your will, you are not free. Now, in the world of duality, one would say, how is that so? I have to pay taxes, I have to obey the law, I can't just live my life in total disregard. And to that I would say, you don't have to pay taxes, you do not have to obey the law, and you are free to do everything in disregard, and you don't have to worry about what others think. You're free to choose. Now, there are consequences for your actions or inaction, but that's the price that you pay for the action that you choose. But the choice is yours and yours alone. Your life as it is today, right now, is the result of all the choices that you've made so far. Whether you made those choices on your own or acquiesced to someone else's idea is irrelevant. You made the choice of your own free will. We all did. Let me explain. Have you ever felt trapped? Perhaps in a relationship, a job, a mountain of debt? Well, I certainly was, and I've certainly felt that way. I felt trapped in a loveless marriage for many years. Oh, it started out like most marriages. I mean, it was lots of love and romance and excitement. Then over the years, through no one's fault in particular, it deteriorated into something less ideal, far less ideal. In fact, for me, at times, it was hell. But I never gave up. I always was taught that, marriage was forever. And it was a forever thing. So I always felt that if I just did more, if I just loved more, if I just this or if I just that, then one day she would wake up and find that I was Prince Charming and she had been wrong all those years. In a one fell swoop, everything would be okay. Well, I had a very vivid imagination. So anyway, I felt trapped because at some level, I felt that if I left, I would be a failure. I always made everything in life work for me. If I left, what would I do? Where would I go? You see, even though we were estranged, I found a way to live with it, to be comfortable with it. For many years, for many of us, and this is really funny because for many of us, a bad relationship is better than no relationship at all. Now that may sound sick, and it is. The ego can warp the mind into unbelievable compromises. Well, this went on for many years. Fortunately, I had a wonderful job where I was loved and respected and enjoyed going to every day. And I took comfort in taking self-help classes and science of mind classes, and I managed to compartmentalize my life into work, church, and home. Then I met and became friends with Reverend David Ault. We had a church retreat at Ananda, near Nevada City. And the theme was being your authentic self. After a few days of soul searching and opening up, David asked me, he said, "Andy, are you happy with your life? Think about it. And how do you want your life to be?" Well, I prayed on it, and I meditated on that question, and for the first time in many years, I was able to stand back and see myself objectively. I saw this estranged relationship honestly. And finally I had to say, no, I'm not happy. When I came home from the retreat, I asked the same question of my ex. I said, "Are you happy in this relationship?" And after a little thought, she said, "No." So I said, we're in our 60s, and with the grace of God, we have another 20, 30 years ahead of us. We both deserve to be happy in a relationship, and this relationship is not working for either one of us. And so we decided we'll get a divorce and go out on my own. Well, I've got to tell you, I've never been happier. It was the thing that needed to be done, and I was so very happy. Well, I moved out shortly afterward, and I've never been happier, and fortunately, I learned along the way that the first thing that I needed to do when we split up was to get into counseling and learn about me, so that I don't draw to myself the very same situation I just left wrapped in a different package. And I also had to learn to discover what's next for me. Now this is the point. I was feeling trapped in a loveless relationship, but it was a trap of my own creation. my own choosing. I got comfortable with my fear, which is the language of the ego, and I let it dictate and dominate my life. My former minister once told me, how you do one thing in life is how you do everything in life. Well, at first I didn't believe her. But then as I saw my life play out and could look at it more objectively, I discovered that she was absolutely right. This plays out in everything. Those of you who, it plays out in relationships, finances, clutter, procrastination, everything. Now those of you who go onto Facebook, you may have seen here lately, there's been one of those inspirational posters where there's a person standing there and they're holding these polished stones in their hand. And the stones say things like hurt and guilt and regret and fear. Then the caption says, you can't reach for something new if your hands are full of yesterday's junk. So when I was able to get away for a few days and really look into my authenticity, I was able to start letting go of yesterday's junk and allow spirit in and free myself from the bondage of fear. I surrendered to spirit and claimed my freedom. When I'm talking about freedom, I'm talking about the freedom of mind with a capital M. The one mind, which is the mind of God, which is your mind, which is my mind, the one mind. It is always and everywhere present, and you and I have our being in it. That is where our power comes from. That is where our freedom comes from. It is absolutely spectacular to know that each of us, as individualized expressions of the one mind, create our lives as we see fit. Now this may be daunting and a bit scary as well, especially when we consider that we are each responsible for creating the life and the world that we live in. But take heart, my friends. The world that we live in that appears outside of us is illusion. It is unreal. It is created in our mind with a small m. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that when you or someone is in pain that it doesn't hurt. Of course it does. I'm not saying that when you see bombings and killings and things that people do to each other and that people don't suffer and they don't die. Of course they do. What I am saying is that although the pain is inevitable, suffering is the option. We encounter painful experiences, and the ego wants to jump right in there and make judgments. But we are free to choose how we will respond to our pain or the action of others. We can embrace what is, even though we do not fully understand it, and know that we are not that experience itself. I am not the pain. I am not what is going on in the world. We accept that we are spirit moving through this experience, or we can give in to ego and focus on the pain. We can get angry or demand some action or blame someone or something outside of ourselves. There's an old expression that goes, do you want to be happy or do you want to be justified? I suggest that if you want to be happy, then you let go of the ego and let spirit take over. Some of you have been coming to the Tuesday night Eckhart Tolle videos, and in that very first video, we learned how Tolle overcame his illness and he came to the realization that he was not his pain. He was not his illness. If he was not these things, then he must be something else. That something else was greater than those things in his body. He was greater than those things that his body was enduring. He discovered that it was the ego that chose to suffer. So he decided to give up suffering and to give into the Spirit, and became healthy and pain-free and embarked on a whole new life. Now, obviously, for some people, that's the exception rather than the rule. But then there's a lot more that goes on behind that belief. I've seen others overcome the same similar circumstances and change their life completely. But we're able to stop compartmentalizing our life. When we are willing to give up the duality thinking, out there, in here, good, bad, them, us, spiritual world, real world, and realize that we are one spiritual, divine, God-created energy, entity, being, one with flowers, the trees, the animals, the mountains, the ocean, one another, and we come into a spiritual union with ourselves, then we will know true freedom. Of course, we're all working on it, and we're exactly where we are supposed to be. We're exactly where we're supposed to be on our path. No one is greater than or lesser than. No one is more enlightened or less enlightened. Each of us is an individualized expression of the one, and we are exactly where we're supposed to be. We are all learning. We are all being. We are all claiming our inheritance of freedom. So if I am to claim my inheritance of freedom, I need to safeguard it. I need to protect it. I need to defend it. I'm not talking about putting on a uniform and waving a flag and sending young people off to war. No, that is outside of me. That is puffed up ego saying, if you change other people's thinking, your life will be better. No, what I'm talking about is preserving and protecting my joy, my happiness, my prosperity, and all the other qualities of God that indwell and surround me. My innate freedom. I'm talking about being conscious and mindful of whom and what I am. Being mindful of my God essence. Mindful of my square meter of earth. I'm talking about knowing that my freedom is not dependent on anything outside of me. I am always free, and always will be free, regardless of appearances or my physical circumstances. It is who I am. Freedom is my divine inheritance, and freedom is your divine inheritance. And so it is. So, if the ushers will do their thing.